The first time I let a stranger hold my baby, it was on a plane at 30,000 feet, and I honestly thought I was the worst father on board. 30 seconds later, the entire business class cabin went silent, and everyone was staring at this black woman like she'd just performed a miracle. Tell me something. If it were you, would you hand your screaming 6-month-old to someone you'd known for less than a minute? Or would you sit there and drown in shame like I had been doing for months? My name is Evan. I run a tech company people love to write articles about, the kind of company that gets words like billion and visionary thrown around. But that day on Flight 228, none of that mattered, because I couldn't do the one thing that actually counted in that moment. I couldn't comfort my own daughter. We'd just taken off out of San Francisco, headed to New York business class, was full of those quietly important people, laptops, open ties loosened that smug silence people buy with expensive tickets. Laya, my 6-month-old, had been restless since we boarded, but once the wheels left the ground, she completely lost it, and it felt like the whole cabin turned and judged me at the exact same time. I tried everything I knew. Bottle pacifier, little stuffed rabbit my late wife had bought before she died, rocking her walking the aisle until the flight attendant told me I had to sit down. Nothing worked. The more I panicked, the louder she screamed. Behind me, a woman muttered something like, "Some people shouldn't fly with babies if they can't control them." And across the aisle, a guy in an expensive suit made a whole performance out of putting on his noise-canceling headphones. Like my daughter's distress was an inconvenience that could be turned off with one click. Even the flight attendants, who were technically polite, kept giving me that tight little smile that said, "We really wish you were on another flight." What they didn't know, what no one on that plane knew, was that 4 months earlier I'd been a completely different man. I was still the CEO, still the guy who lived on red eyes and investor calls, but I also had a wife, Sarah, who made early parenthood look effortless. She took maternity leave from her legal career to be home with Laya, and she had this instinct I still don't fully understand. She knew exactly what every cry meant, when to pick our daughter up and when to let her fuss, how to get her to fall asleep in 2 minutes flat, when I couldn't manage it in an hour. You know the type, right? The parent who makes you think, "Oh, so that's how it's supposed to look." Then one afternoon, a drunk driver ran a red light, 2 in the afternoon, bright ordinary day, and just like that, Sarah was gone. The other driver walked away with minor injuries, and my wife died at the scene. Laya was 2 months old. Grief hit like a tidal wave, and while I was still underwater, people handed me this other job I had never trained for. Full-time single father to a newborn I barely knew how to hold correctly. The first few weeks after the accident, my mother flew in and basically ran the house. She fed the baby, she cooked, she answered the door when people brought flowers and casseroles and said, "If you need anything, call me," knowing I wouldn't, because that's just how people do grief. They mean well, but they go home. Eventually, she had to go back to California, because people can't put their own lives on hold forever. And I was left staring at this tiny person who cried for reasons I didn't understand and needed things I didn't know how to give. I did what people like me always do. I tried to outsource the problem. I hired nannies through agencies. My assistant recommended women with glowing references and clean resumes, and one by one they burned out. First one lasted 3 weeks, said Laya cried too much, and I was never around. Second one made it 5, third one quit. 2 days before that flight, after a weekend, where I had to travel on short notice and my phone kept dying in meetings, and she couldn't reach me during some baby crisis. Every time someone left the message I heard wasn't, "This job is hard," it was, "You're failing at the one thing you can't afford to fail at." So when you fast forward to Flight 228, to me sitting in seat 3A with a red-faced, screaming 6-month-old, shaking hands, bloodshot eyes, you have to understand. That wasn't just one bad flight. That was months of grief, guilt, and exhaustion exploding in a metal tube with nowhere for me to hide. And then I heard her voice. "Excuse me," someone said from across the aisle, and it cut through the crying like a clean slice. "Would you like me to try?" I looked up and saw a young black woman, maybe in her late 20s, curls framing her face, jeans, simple sweater. No designer logos, just presence calm, steady eyes that didn't look annoyed or entertained or superior, just genuinely concerned, like she cared more about my daughter than the possibility of a quiet flight. "I don't know if she'll stop," I managed, and I could hear my own voice crack. "She hasn't since we boarded. I've tried everything I know how to do." She gave me this small, grounded smile. "My name's Danielle," she said. "I've been a nanny for years. I work with babies all the time. Sometimes they just need a different person, a different energy. Would you mind if I tried to calm her?" There are moments in life where your instinct and your fear start arguing in your head. At the same time, you know what I mean. One voice is yelling, "Don't give your child to a stranger. The world is crazy. What are you doing?" And the other is whispering, "You're out of options. You need help. You can't do this alone." Sitting there, sweat running down my back, Laya screaming in my arms, people rolling their eyes behind me, I had to pick one voice. So I handed her my baby. Danielle took Laya like she'd done this exact thing 1,000 times before. No hesitation, no awkward fumbling. She shifted her so that Laya's ear was pressed right above her heart, one hand under her bottom, the other cradling her head. The kind of hold that looks simple until you try it yourself and realize it's actually very intentional. Then she started humming, some old lullaby, low and steady, and I watched the vibration run through her chest into my daughter's tiny body. In less than a minute, Laya's screams softened into sobs, then hiccups, and then nothing. Just quiet, heavy sleep. Little fist gripping Danielle's sweater like she'd decided, "All right, I'm safe now." The entire cabin shifted, the tension just leaking out of the air. Business guy lowered his headphones and stared the woman behind me shut up. The flight attendants exchanged looks like, "Should we book her for the next flight too?" "You must have magic in your voice," I whispered, because honestly I had no better explanation. "It's not magic," she said gently. "Babies are wired for heartbeats and vibrations. When I hold her like this and hum, she feels the rhythm through my chest. It reminds her of being in the womb. Warm, safe, surrounded by sound. Your heartbeat, your tone. That's the first world she ever knew." She glanced at me, not unkindly. "And I'm calm so she can be calm. Right now, your nervous system is going 100 miles an hour, and she was feeling all of that. So I've been making it worse," I said quietly. That familiar guilt rising up again, my anxiety has been making her more anxious, hasn't it? "You've been doing your best in a brutal situation," she said. "There's a big difference between being ignorant and being uncaring. You're not uncaring, you're grieving and overwhelmed. That's human." That word again, grieving. "How did you know I'm grieving?" I asked because I hadn't told anyone on that plane about Sarah. I was just trying to keep my head above water long enough to get to New York. She looked at me for a second, like she was making sure I actually wanted the truth. "The way you hold her," she said softly, "like she's the most precious thing you've ever touched, but you're terrified you're going to break her. The exhaustion in your eyes that goes deeper than bad sleep. And the way you keep saying everything I know how to do, instead of just everything. That tells me you know there's a whole skill set you never got to learn. Most solo parents of 6-month-olds are tired, but there's something recent about your fear. My wife died 4 months ago," I told her. And even then, even after saying those words 100 times at the funeral, and to colleagues and to well-meaning friends, they still didn't feel real in my mouth. Car accident, middle of the day, drunk driver. Laya was 2 months old. Sarah was the one who could read every cry. I was the guy who came home for bedtime stories if I got out of the office on time. Suddenly, I'm it, and I have no idea what I'm doing." "I'm so sorry," Danielle said, and I could tell she meant it, not just the way people say it, because they don't know what else to say, trying to survive that kind of loss while caring for an infant. There's no way to do that perfectly, no matter how rich or smart or put together you are. Anyone would be struggling. For the rest of the flight, while Laya slept against her chest like they'd known each other forever, Danielle talked to me in this soft, matter-of-fact way that made all the parenting blogs I'd skimmed at 3 a.m. feel like noise. She explained different kinds of baby cries, not like a manual, but like she'd learned them from paying attention. The angry yell of overtired, the frantic pitch of hungry, the restless whine of overstimulated. She talked about routines and how they're more about safety than control, about why an anxious adult body can turn a fussy baby into a meltdown, about how our culture expects babies to behave like tiny adults, and then labels them good or bad, depending on how convenient they are. I told her about Sarah, about how guilty I felt for not learning this stuff sooner, about my mother coming to help, and then having to go home, about the nannies who had quit the agency that treated my daughter like just another assignment. Somewhere between Nevada and Ohio, I felt something small but shocking flicker in my chest. I felt hope. Now, if this were a simple story, it would end there right, with the kind stranger calming the crying baby, the grateful father saying, "Thank you, everybody," moving on with their lives. But real life doesn't always fade out that neatly. Sometimes the story keeps going. Sometimes the person in seat 3B doesn't just disappear. When we landed at JFK, I couldn't just grab my bags and say goodbye, so I asked if I could at least buy her a coffee as a thank you. We ended up at a crowded airport Starbucks plastic cups on a small table, Leia still knocked out in her arms, like she'd finally found the one place in the world that made sense. I told Danielle how things had been since the accident, in a way I hadn't told anyone outside of my family, how every nanny had bailed, how my mom helped as much as she could, but lived across the country, how I was trying to keep a company alive while feeling like I was failing at the most fundamental thing a human can fail, at keeping their child safe and soothed. And then I heard myself say, before I could even think about how it sounded, "I know this is sudden, but I need help, help, consistent help. Would you ever consider being Laya's nanny?" She blinked. "I mean, imagine you calm a stranger's baby on a plane, and 20 minutes later, he's basically offering you a whole new life." "Evan," she said carefully, That's very flattering, but I have a teaching job in Brooklyn, and also we literally met a few hours ago in the sky. Don't you think this is a lot very fast?" Probably, I admitted, and for once in my life I didn't try to spin it, but I'm serious. "You're the first person besides my wife who's actually been able to reach her like that. I'll pay you more than fairly. You'd have your own space in my place, time off benefits, whatever's standard, and then some. And you mentioned on the plane you dream of opening your own daycare someday. I can help you build toward that as part of the job, not as charity, just as a real career path. Let me pause and ask you this, because I know some of you are already thinking it. If you were her, would you take that offer, or would you run in the opposite direction, from the grief-stricken millionaire with a crying baby and a fixer instinct? Do you think that's fair, the way money and power can make a genuine offer feel like a trap? Danielle sat with it, hands around her coffee, really thinking. "The school year ends in 6 weeks, she said finally. "I can't walk out on my kids and my director before then, that wouldn't be right. But if you still need help after the semester ends, and if we can set up clear boundaries, work hours, respect all of that, then, yeah, I'd be open to it." We exchanged numbers. That alone lifted something off my chest. Before we split, I asked if I could take her to dinner that night, as a proper thank you. No strings, just a chance to get to know the woman who had just changed my entire flight, and maybe my life. She agreed on one condition. "Laya comes too," she said, smiling. "I need more data. Airplane baby is one thing, restaurant baby is another." That evening, at a family Italian place I knew was used to toddlers and tired parents. I watched my daughter do something I hadn't seen since before the accident. She laughed. Not that polite little half-giggle babies do, I mean full-body arms flailing, head-thrown-back laughter as Danielle played peekaboo with a napkin and made silly faces. It hit me in the chest like a freight train. I haven't heard her laugh like that since before. I started, and I had to stop because my throat closed around the word before Sarah died. Danielle glanced at me, then back at the baby. "She didn't stop being a joyful baby," she said quietly. "She's just been living in your grief with you." Babies soak up whatever they're swimming in. Sometimes when the parent's world gets a little lighter, the baby's world does too. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. 6 weeks later, right on schedule after the school year ended, Danielle arrived at my Manhattan penthouse with 2 suitcases and a box of her favorite books. I'd spent those weeks holding it together with help from my mom and a temporary nanny counting down the days like some kind of personal advent calendar. When Danielle stepped through the door, Laya took one look at her and practically launched herself out of my arms, squealing little hands reaching. I had been terrified she would forget, but babies remember safety more than specifics. I'd set up a nanny suite for Danielle. Bedroom, private bathroom, tiny sitting room with a couch and a bookshelf, even a separate entrance through the kitchen, so she wouldn't feel like she had to walk through my living room if she just wanted to come and go. When I showed it to her, she looked around and shook her head. "This is nicer than my last apartment," she laughed. "Most live-in nannies I know get a bed wedged between a storage closet and the washing machine." "You're not a live-in appliance," I said. "You're a human being who's about to shoulder a huge chunk of my most important responsibility. I want you to have a real life, not just a cot near the baby monitor." We sat down at the dining table and mapped everything out like you would a big project at work. Work hours, days off, what counted as an emergency knock on her door, and what didn't, weekly check-ins, shared calendars for my travel schedule. And then I asked for something that I think changed my life as much as her calming Laya did. "I don't want you to be a replacement parent." I told her I don't want to disappear into my office and let you raise my daughter. I want to learn everything you know. I want you to teach me how to be good at this. When it's my time with her, I don't want to be guessing all the time. A lot of people in my position would not have said that. They'd just hand off the baby and focus on their career. But losing Sarah had stripped something out of me, some illusion that I could buy my way out of learning hard things. "That's actually really healthy," Danielle said. "A lot of parents with nannies hide behind them instead of working with them. I'm happy to teach you anything I know as long as you're willing to practice and not just expect a magic trick." So we got to work. She taught me how to swaddle without turning Laya into a pretzel, how to read that glassy-eyed stare that meant I'm overtired, and everything is terrible, how to tell the difference between a hunger cry and a boredom cry. She taught me that crying wasn't manipulation. It was communication, that babies don't wake up in the middle of the night to ruin our lives. They wake up because their stomachs are tiny and their brains are still wiring themselves together. She taught me that some of what I thought were emergencies were actually just discomfort, and some of what I thought I could ignore actually needed quick action. One night, sitting on the bathroom floor while Danielle bathed Laya, I watched her pour warm water over my daughter's little belly, talking to her like a person instead of like a chore. And I asked, "How did you get so good at this?" "Practice," she said, "lots of practice. I've been caring for kids since I was 14. But honestly, a big part of it is just not expecting babies to be anything other than what they are. Adults get frustrated when babies don't fit into our idea of good. Sleeping on our schedule, never crying in public, not needing too much. When you meet them where they are instead of where you wish they were, life gets easier for everyone." It was like someone changed the software in my brain. A few months into this new arrangement, my company hit a rough patch that required me to fly to Seattle for a week for back-to-back meetings. The night before, I found myself in the kitchen again at some ridiculous hour staring into the fridge like it might offer emotional advice. Danielle walked in with a mug of tea, eyebrows raised, and we both laughed because the pattern had become obvious. Big feelings kitchen, late night. "You're scared to go," she said, not as a question. "Absolutely. I said I know you can handle her. That's not the issue. My brain feels like if I'm not physically within arm's reach of her at all times, something bad will happen. And I won't be there, and it'll be my fault." "Totally normal," she said. "But Evan, part of what you're paying me for is to handle things when you can't be there. I'll send pictures, videos, you can FaceTime at bedtime, and if something truly serious happens, I'll call. But you have to let yourself trust that we can keep her safe while you handle the part of your life that keeps the lights on." So I went. It wasn't easy the first day. I checked my phone like it was an oxygen tank, but Danielle kept her promises. Little videos of Laya laughing, photos of messy meals, quick texts about things like, "She tried peas today, made a horrible face, 0 out of 10, would not recommend." When I came home, Laya squealed and grabbed my face and hugged my neck, and all that fear that she'd forget me evaporated. And that kind of set the tone for the next phase of our lives. 6 months after Danielle moved in, Thanksgiving rolled around, and my mom, Margaret, flew in from California. General rule in my family: if you want the truth, ask Margaret. She watched Danielle for about half a day before pulling me aside. "She's good," my mom said quietly, while Danielle changed Laya upstairs, "not just with the baby with you. You were pretty lost the last time I was here. You're different now, more grounded." "She saved us," I said, and I meant it. I don't know how else to describe it. At dinner that night, my mom asked Danielle about her own family and her plans, and that's when I heard about her dream in detail for the first time. She wanted to open a daycare in a house, small group of kids, sliding scale tuition, so wealthy families paid full price and lower income families paid what they could, designed after the way her grandmother had basically run an informal daycare out of their home growing up. She had business plans, printed out spreadsheets, notes, all of it, and about $15,000 saved, which sounds like a lot until you start pricing rent, licensing, insurance, supplies, payroll. Later that night, my mom came into my office, closed the door, and said, "Have you thought about investing in her dream? Not as a pity project, as a real business you happen to believe in." I had thought about it. I just didn't want to make Danielle feel like she owed me more than she already did. But my mom had a point, and the more I watched Danielle with my daughter and my mother and my friends over the next few weeks, the more clear it became. This woman wasn't just good at childcare, she had a vision that deserved backing. So when Laya turned 1 after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, except for the soft buzz of the baby monitor, I sat Danielle down at the kitchen table and said, "I want to invest in your daycare. Not as a gift, as a real investment. You'd own most of it. You'd make the decisions. I'd help you get it off the ground." She looked stunned, then cautious, then determined. "I'd have to talk to a lawyer, make sure the terms are fair," she said. "I don't want our work here and that project to get tangled up in a way that hurts either of us." "Good," I said. "That's exactly the kind of person I want to invest in." We drew up the paperwork. She kept 70% of grandmother's garden. I took 30, she had full operational control, and I wrote a check that turned her detailed plans into reality. A few months later, there was a real brownstone in Brooklyn filled with tiny shoes and little backpacks, and the kind of laughter that sounds like chaos to some people and like music to others. The daycare filled up fast. Wealthy parents jumped at the chance to support something meaningful. Families with less money cried when they realized they could afford real quality care. Here comes the twist. Somewhere in the middle of all that building and surviving and co-parenting, my feelings for Danielle changed. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was more like a sunrise I didn't notice until the room was already bright. I realized I was looking forward to our late-night kitchen talks more than my board meetings, that I noticed the way her whole face lit up when Laya did something hilarious, that I caught myself watching her across rooms and then looking away before she caught me. And with that realization came a ton of guilt and fear. I was her boss, her landlord, her investor, the father of the child she loved. The power imbalance was massive. The last thing I ever wanted was for her to feel like she had to entertain my feelings to keep her job or her home or her business. So I said nothing. For a long time. Of course, my mom figured it out. Mothers always do. "You're in love with her," she said one afternoon, while we were watching Danielle teach Leia how to stack blocks. "You know that, right?" "It doesn't matter," I answered. "It would be wrong to act on it. She depends on me too much. It would be coercive even if I didn't mean it that way." "So what are you going to do?" my mom asked. "Nothing," I said. "I'm going to keep being her employer and her co-parent ally, and that's it. And maybe eventually my feelings will calm down." Spoiler, they didn't. But life has a way of shifting dynamics for you when you're too stubborn to do it yourself. About 2 years after that flight, Danielle sat me down during one of our check-ins and said, "I can't keep doing both things full-time, Evan. Grandmother's garden is growing fast, and Laya is ready for preschool. You don't need a full-time live-in nanny anymore, not the way you did when we met. You're a good father now. You know that, right?" I did know it, even if some wounded part of me still doubted it. So we made a new plan. Danielle would move into her own apartment near the daycare. Laya would attend grandmother's garden as a student. I would handle mornings and evenings and learn how to run the house without her in the next room. The first night after she moved out, the apartment felt too big and too quiet. I found myself texting her things like, "She just tried broccoli," made a face like I insulted her ancestors, partly because I wanted to share, partly because I missed her presence more than I cared to admit. 6 months later, once the dust had settled and our new routines felt normal, I asked if she'd have dinner with me, just the two of us. "Not a work meeting," I said, "just dinner between friends. I miss talking to you without 3 other things happening in the background." We went to an Italian place because apparently that's our default setting. And for most of the night, it felt like old times, just without the high chair. Near the end of the meal, my heart pounding, like the first time I pitched investors, I took a breath and said, "I need to tell you something, and if it makes things weird, I'll live with that. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." I told her I had romantic feelings for her, that they'd been there for a while, that I'd never said anything, because of all the power dynamics, because she had every reason to feel trapped if I wasn't careful. I told her she didn't owe me anything, that if she didn't feel the same, I would never bring it up again, and nothing about my support for her or Laya would change. She looked at me for a long moment, and I was pretty sure I was about to lose one of the most important relationships in my life. Then she laughed a little, not unkindly, more like she was relieved. "Evan," she said, "I've had feelings for you for at least 1.5 years. But you were my boss, my landlord, my business partner, and the father of the child I loved most in the world. I didn't want you to feel pressured, and I didn't want to feel like I was saying yes to anything out of fear. I'd lose everything if I said no. That's why I needed to move out when I did. I needed us to not be boss and employee before we could even think about this." Yeah, that happened. Our first kiss happened in the parking lot, both of us laughing because our teeth bumped and we were too nervous to be smooth, but it didn't matter, because it felt right, not in some movie montage way, but in a quiet, solid, "Oh, this makes sense" way. The next hurdle was Laya. We didn't want her feeling like her whole world had flipped overnight. Over time, we started spending more time together, as family friends, letting her see Danielle at our place again, letting her ask questions. One night when she was about 3, she crawled into my lap and asked very straightforward, "Is Miss Danielle my mama now?" "Miss Danielle has been like a mama to you for a long time." I told her, "Your first mom, Sarah, loved you so much when you were tiny, and she died before you could remember her. Nobody will ever replace her. Danielle loves you too, and she wants to be in our family forever if that's okay with you. I love Miss Danielle, she said, shrugging like it was the easiest decision in the world. I'm glad she's staying. We dated for a while, gave ourselves time to find our footing, before bringing lawyers back into it. And about 3 years after that original flight, we got married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Laya was our flower girl, throwing petals so enthusiastically, she almost emptied the basket on the first row. Sarah's parents came, and I'll never forget the way her mother hugged Danielle and said thank you for loving our granddaughter and our son. In my vows, I told Danielle the truth, that she saved me and my daughter when we were at our lowest, that she taught me how to be a father instead of just a provider, that I never thought I'd be able to love anyone after Sarah's death, and yet here I was, full to the brim. In hers, she said she had no idea offering to help a crying baby on a plane would lead to a family, a business, a movement, but that she wouldn't trade the chaos of our life for anything. Years rolled by. We had 2 more kids, Marcus and then a little girl we named Sarah, with her grandparents' blessing. Grandmother's garden grew from one cozy brownstone daycare into a small network, then into a bigger one. By the time we hit the 10-year mark from that original flight, we had 8 locations across New York City, all built around Danielle's original vision. Sliding scale tuition, high-quality care, emotionally intelligent teachers, kids from different backgrounds growing up side by side. At one of our fundraising galas, 10 years in Laya, now a confident 10-year-old, stood up on stage and told a room full of donors. Before my mom Danielle came into our lives, my dad didn't know how to take care of me very well. I cried a lot. He was sad and didn't know what to do. Then my mom helped him on an airplane and everything got better. Then she grinned at us like she'd just roasted us in public and nailed it. A talk show producer saw that speech and called us a week later. "We want to put your story on TV," they said. "Millionaire crying baby, black nanny daycare empire. It's gold." We had a lot of conversations about whether we wanted to open our family up like that, but we realized the message mattered more than our discomfort, so we agreed with conditions. Our kids' faces would be protected. We'd control which parts of the story got told. On the show, the host asked Danielle, "What would you say to someone who hears a baby crying on a plane and wants to put on their headphones and tune it out?" "Look, you don't have to become a full-time nanny for every crying kid you see," she said, laughing. "But if you have the capacity and the skills, offer help. Even if you don't have kids, sometimes just a kind look instead of a judgmental one changes everything. You have no idea when your small act of compassion might be the thing that stops someone from completely breaking." Then the host turned to me. "And what would you say to the dad you were on that plane?" I thought about it for a second. I'd tell him real strength isn't doing everything alone. I said it's being honest about when you're drowning and taking the hand that's reaching for you. I grew up thinking needing help made you weak. Surviving grief and raising a baby taught me that accepting help is one of the bravest things you can do. 15 years after Flight 228. Danielle and I booked that same route again. San Francisco to New York, Flight 228. Same seats side by side this time. No baby on our laps, just hands intertwined. We took off, felt that familiar lift in our stomachs, and looked at each other like, can you believe what that one flight started? 20, 25, 30 years later, the story just kept rippling. Grandmother's garden expanded to other cities. Former students came back as teachers, social workers, pediatricians. At our 25th anniversary celebration, a woman approached Danielle with tears in her eyes and said, "You don't remember me, but I was the flight attendant on your San Francisco flight. I brought you warm milk for the crying baby. I watched you hold her and sing like it was the most natural thing in the world. I had no idea that moment would turn into all of this. Danielle looked around at the crowded room. Kids, parents, staff, our grown children serving cake, and said, honestly, neither did I. I just saw a dad who looked like he was about to break, and a baby who needed to feel safe. Everything else came later. 30 years after that flight, we sat in our living room with grandkids running around our feet, and Laya's 5-year-old daughter climbed into Danielle's lap and said, "Grandma, tell the story again when Grandpa didn't know how to make Mommy stop crying, and you saved them." Danielle told it with all the dramatic flair the kids loved. But later that night, after everyone had gone home and the apartment was finally quiet, we stood at the window looking out at the city, and I asked her, "Do you ever regret it, not putting your headphones in that day, taking on me, my grief, my baby, this whole wild life? Simpler life if I had ignored you," she said, "but emptier. Every hard thing we went through brought us here. If I went back, I'd do it all again." So here's where I turn it back to you. We live in a world where people call what Danielle did unthinkable. Not because it was dangerous or extreme, but because we've gotten so used to minding our own business that basic compassion shocks us. We still chronically underpay and undervalue the people who care for our kids, our elders, our communities, and then we act surprised when systems fall apart. We praise billionaires for cutting big checks, but barely notice the quiet women in the middle seats who hold screaming babies and rewrite destinies with a lullaby. If you were on that plane back then, honestly, which person would you have been? The one putting on noise-canceling headphones? The one muttering about parents these days? The one drowning in shame with a crying baby in their arms? Or the one who crossed the aisle and said, "Do you want help? If you've been any of those people in real life, what did you learn from it?" The millionaire's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane. Then a black woman did the unthinkable. She helped. No contract, no cameras, no promise of a daycare empire or a love story or a movement. Just help. And that's what I want to leave you with. We love big miracle stories, but most life-changing moments start small. One person choosing compassion over comfort. One father swallowing his pride long enough to accept a stranger's arms. One yes that opens a door 10 years down the road. So tell me in the comments, do you think we value the right people in our society? Do we treat caregivers, teachers, nannies, preschool workers with the respect and pay they deserve? Or do we take them for granted until it's our kid who needs them? If it were you on that flight today, what would you have done and what do you wish someone would do for you the next time you're the one struggling in public? If this story hits something in you, tap like so it gets pushed to someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more real stories about messy humans trying their best, not just highlight reels, and share this video with that friend you know who's quietly carrying way too much on their own. Tell us your stories down below. The times you asked for help, the times you offered it, or the times you wish you had. I'll be down there reading because this isn't just my story and Danielle's story. It's about all of us and what we choose to do when we hear someone crying in the next seat.